All right, so I'll send you guys a link. Make sure you can find this, but we'll just, Zoom makes it pretty easy for me to just go straight out to YouTube, which is what they want us to do. That way the computer doesn't have to be occupied processing our classes afterwards. I don't know if you guys have recorded on Zoom yet, but you know, an hour-long recording takes 15 minutes to process and get ready, so this is real time for us. And I think it's automatically recorded. Should allow these to all be
Thank you.
immediately available to anyone who's not able to be here. Okay, I'm gonna let YouTube do its thing. Yeah, you wanna turn something off? Let's take attendance. Lalea is here, Isabel is here. Isabel Alba is here. Gloria yet?
She's
Emma?
gonna drop somebody off at the airport,
Emma.
so she won't be here.
She won't be here?
No.
And give her excuse. Mason? No Mason today. Garrett? Taylor? Quinn is online. Logan? Here. Logan. Antonio seems to have sort of disappeared. Corey? Okay. All right, so really the gist today is looking at narrative from a perspective of both what is the purpose and what is the structure. So we'll spend a little time just talking about the purpose of narrative. Are you guys online? Can you hear me? Everyone good?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Let us know if you have any problems. Otherwise, it's hard to kind of think about you guys as well. So not that you're an afterthought, just that I know you're there. So, you know, we're going to look at narrative first from a purpose standpoint. What is the purpose of storytelling? Let's just discuss this a little bit, just hash it out. What do you think the importance and the purpose of storytelling in our culture and our humanity is?
Sometimes it's to teach a lesson or be a reflection of a culture, maybe issues that are going on, or maybe good things that are going on.
Right? It can analyze, it can interpret, inform. What else do we get out of storytelling, or why do we tell stories as opposed to other ways of communicating?
To entertain.
What's that?
To entertain.
Entertainment, huge. Probably the original form or reason behind stories. What else? As you guys think about when you tell stories, I'm asking you to kind of look inside a little bit. What's your motivation? What's your goal?
Bring perspective. Like how you encountered something. Like to shed light on like a different area of like how like one person may see it, you know?
Express yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, right? I mean, that fits neatly with what we're doing, what we're creating. Taylor?
Persuading.
What's that?
Persuading.
Persuading. Absolutely. And, you know, we talked a little bit about how we're basically wired for storytelling and responding to human stories. And so businesses and politicians use stories and narratives all the time as a way to engage us emotionally and persuade us with some kind of meaning or message, moral to the story, right? Online, you guys got any thoughts on why you tell stories? What purpose stories serve for you?
I feel like just thinking on a class I had last semester that he talked about how it was easier if you're like a leader to motivate people or like persuade people using stories.
Did he elaborate why? Why stories?
I think just maybe the emotional aspect of like connecting to the character.
Identifying, yes, with characters, definitely. Lalea, any thoughts?
I kind of was thinking the same thing too. Other than that, it's like you can get a lot of like empathy or show, like you can just create a whole different visual for someone with a story.
So it's a way of communicating person to person. It's a powerful way. And what they found is because of that ability to empathize, identify, kind of recognize ourselves in a character, and our ability to feel. That's what makes story information told in a story different from just a laundry list of details. The story tends to evoke our emotional responses kind of automatically, right? I saw a dog get run over by a car in front of campus today. Look, everyone, I could see Garrett like immediately winced, right? Like that image evokes a feeling without having to think about it. So that's where storytelling has this magical power that just an information piece doesn't.
Also, it has the ability to desensitize.
To desensitize.
Yes, not only tell, but also desensitize, because we see so much corrupt, negative, distorted. There's different types of media. It's kind of gotten rampant from like 20 years ago, the media.
Mm-hmm.
Journalism is kind of pushed to the wayside with different styles of journalism and who can write and what they write.
So,
But that narrative is,
we get into a branch of context, not just how does a story affect us or what purpose can it serve in our communication, but what happens when you have too many stories,
overload.
too many negative stories. We call them news stories. They're often news reports, but they cross over. So that's interesting. I hadn't thought about looking at it. I'm thinking individually. What I want you guys, like I said, is to kind of think inwardly here in the beginning, at the start of the creative process, and think about what your goals will be for stories that you're going to tell. Because that becomes a fuel and a foundation for all the other work that you can do if you have this central piece. So part of the the purposes are, to entertain, to inform, to persuade, to influence, and ultimately, I would say the big thing we do to tell when we seek to tell stories is to make a connection. I want you to like my story, or I want you to be moved by my story. If we're sitting around the table and I go, oh, I got to tell you what happened yesterday. My goal is not to bore you to death, right? And some people just talk and tell stories because they like to hear themselves talk. But if you really think about, if you're thinking about your audience, when you tell your friends a story, you kind of have a goal in mind. You may not have, it's not conscious, but you want to make them laugh. Or you just want to share and connect on a common ground. I had this thing happen to me. You'll feel how powerful it was if I tell you this story, right? But the power is emotion, feeling that you can create with stories. And then with video, so we have stories, and there's many different ways to tell a story. And then in this class, we look at doing it in video, where you have pictures or images, moving images, changing images, the ability to edit from one shot to another. You can add music for emotional tone. You can have the human voice involved, whether it's narration or dialogue. You can add little sound effects in. You have this whole toolkit. It's almost overwhelming to think about it. But remember that it all has to kind of come back to like, what's the point, right? What's my goal here in telling this story? Because that could tell you if this motion graphic is more of a distraction. If it doesn't serve that endpoint, you can kind of think, you know what, I can do away with that, or this piece of dialogue. So I think it's just a good starting point to think about our purpose. And so a way to look at it is, think about it this way. You may want to write this down or take a note. But as you go into your idea and conception process, which leads to scripting, treatment scripting, ask yourself, if there's one point, if there's one thing I want my viewer to take away at the end of this video, what is it? Friendship is good. School is hard. Try and give yourself one point. There can be lots of other information in there, but I want to see it all come together ultimately where you could say, everything I did ultimately tried to drive this one thing home, okay? And then your creative options, what this does is it allows you to organize. Your creative options are endless. How do we make them not just be a mishmash of ideas, right? Well, this is how you do it. Narrow down to one thing. Now, in longer stories, movies, there could be many takeaways, but we're doing short stuff. We're doing 2 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes. I think having sort of one central goal or point at the end is a good idea. And then it informs, once you know what you want to achieve, how you want to leave the viewer, it then informs how you produce the piece. How many of you have seen the movie The Shining? Scary movie, right? What was their goal in The Shining, do you think?
Keep you on edge. Scary.
Entertain and scare, right? Scare, fear is fun. So it's very entertaining to be frightened, right? And if we look at the production, the thing that always jumps out to me is that music. When he slams the guy in the chest with the axe and the music goes, wee, 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 wee. The way they edited it, all of that was meant to scare us. The blood, opening the imagery, the blood coming out of the elevator doors and the scary little girls. It's all, you can see their goal was to scare, and they made all these production elements that fit that purpose. So that's one way to kind of think about following your main theme. So I want to share with you guys some work that other students have done. And I asked you guys last class to think about your values and, what themes or takeaways are kind of important to you. Is there something you'd like to say to your audience that we can help you find that voice in this class? And that's an inner search, inner journey. And it can be as simple as I want to just make people laugh. But sometimes we have deeper things. So this was really interesting. This came out of nowhere. This was a student who hadn't done a lot of video work, but by the end of the class, he had just, this is something I just keep sharing because it just sort of stunned me with it. So it's a little long, but I think you'll appreciate it. Guys online, if you have any problems hearing audio or something, just let us know. Try and get all the settings here. Let me just double check. Let's see if our audio is. Coming out of the owl, huh? I wonder if that means it's overridden this speaker system. Guess so.
YouTube should do the same for the good professors. For YouTube for-
All right, so we'll watch this.
Class.
The discussion at the end of this will be what do you think the point is? But also, how did they produce it? Sorry, I stopped. That's probably the fourth or fifth time I've watched that all the way through like that. And it just keeps getting better every time. I don't know what exactly I can tell you things that I love about it, but when it all comes together, you know, it's an experience, right? No one said a word. Did you ever really get bored and drift during that, or did most of it just kind of keep you moving along?
I was wondering what was gonna happen next.
Just a little suspense, a little tension.
Yeah.
I was expecting a jump scare.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she did, well, and this is an interesting student. I don't know if Milo's still here, Milo Bossier, transgender, and I think trans from female to male. It's hard to tell, but one thing that so I'll share that in a second, but as we look at Milo's story there, obviously from the heart, right, an internal psychological type portrait, what do you think is one takeaway that an audience could get from that, and that maybe the producer intended?
Unstable. It's kind of like the idea I was getting at. I don't know if that was like the right word to use, but like just not knowing like where it's gonna be going. You don't know, like kind of like I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, definitely sort of uncertain, right? Not everything is cohesive, flowing together. There's conflict. What else?
Feels like they were ungrounded, like they needed all the reminders, like, oh, you need to get food, and bring them back to like, oh, I should do that, so like make sure to say like, you need to grab your keys, oh yeah, I need that so I can get back into my house, like constant reminders, just for like basic things you think you would remember, but like that. not feeling
What
grounded
does that
like
say about that person or us as people?
There's, not everybody struggles with that, but I feel like that is a struggle that people go through. It's like they're so like feel uneven on the inside or like unsteady on the inside. That it can be hard to do things to maintain a steady life on the outside.
Also,
Right? Yeah.
also the title blue, even the, just the look, everything's cold.
Is that a filter?
A dark type of theme, somewhat dark.
Absolutely. It's very,
So,
I don't know, sort of isolated and lonely, and it looks that way. It's gray, it's muted. He shot it under, cloudy morning skies. And some of it, I think, is luck. The morning sky just happened to be perfect when he had time to go out and shoot. But you catch lightning in a bottle sometimes. The sky atmospheric feeling is perfect visually for the theme of the
snow even had blue tint to it.
So we could have, and we'll get into that in post, there's color correction filters. Mostly we use them just to enhance the video. Video coming out of the camera looks a little dull. You just tweak it with color correction at the end of your process and it makes it vibrant. Or if you want to make it atmospheric, you can do things like that. Make it duller on purpose, make it a little blue tinted on purpose. So those are easy tools that we'll get to.
It also felt like a familiar story because, like, at least for me, I've always like had an overactive imagination of somebody going inside my closet, like opening the door and stuff. So that was really, really well done, and then the static noise that came along with it. One of the things I really appreciated about this narrative was the difference between silence and the difference between noise. Because the first piano was like the first, I don't know, kind of like narrative like music that you get, the kind of like, oh, she's walking along, or they're walking along, sorry. And when they come to like the mailbox, then it's quiet, all you hear is them getting into the mailbox and then opening the door, getting into their house. It's like such a difference between them being outside and then them being inside, like the isolation between being, it was really cool. The sound design of this is
It's a remarkable piece. The soundtrack is unbelievable.
amazing.
Also, the script writing over the filming was another, I think, key thing that helped the viewer go through the process, because we didn't know what to expect, and then they would print something and redirect us.
And I had Milo before this class. I had him in media writing class, was just written word, and just a phenomenally talented natural writer. And I think that comes out, he just understands a story and and its sensitivity to an audience. What does my audience need to get what I'm trying to go through? And he realized that those little blurbs helped set the table so that we were much more engaged. This is Blue. Blue can't sleep. And who hasn't laid awake at night thinking about all our worries in the world, right? So right away, there's sort of this universal human experience, and now we have Blue's interpretation or Milo's interpretation, visualization of that. 9 minutes, almost 10 minutes on that. You can imagine the amount of work that went in, and it wasn't required, but he got caught up in the creative process, and it just, for some, that was like the third or fourth video he ever did. So very, and you never know. You guys, you can't manufacture greatness. If we could all make a viral video today and it would go to 30 million people and we'd be YouTube stars, right? It's something you almost catch, like lightning in a bottle, they say. Now, as you get better, if you've been making movies for 20, 30 years, you had a successful career, you know what works and you can build on that. But in the beginning, do your best, but you never know. Sometimes some things are just going to come together beautifully, and sometimes they're going to be okay, and you're going to look back and say, if I could do it again, I would change this or that. In this case, it just came together. Whatever flow. Have you ever just written a paper and it was an A right away, just as you started? That's kind of how this goes. Sometimes you just hit one out of the park without doing much different than what you did. Guys online, did you have any thoughts or reactions to Blue, or is there one thing you could say you took away from it?
I really like the storyline of it all. You just kind of just like almost you really be in his shoes, but a lot of the video editing for it too helped a lot with telling a story.
It was very well put together, and we'll get into the technique he used both with audio and video. One thing that I noticed about the video right was everything's shot at right angles. The walls are it's always a flat surface looking right at it, or looking directly at a profile, directly at his face. That was interesting. I don't know if that was because it was easier to manage that way, because he was setting up the camera and then running around and acting out in front of it. I don't think there was anyone else involved in that production. So all of those shots were set, and then he walked out and did the acting, does a phenomenal job acting, right? The facial expression, all of that. I mean, you just buy this right away.
And the point of him not wearing shoes, having bare feet, that's kind of like a real personal, it's just like putting yourself out there.
It felt symbolic when you first saw the bare feet. I was thinking about that this time too. What did the bare feet say to you guys? Just an idea, just sort of little images you can throw out there to evoke things.
Kind of showed how vulnerable Blue was.
Vulnerability, that's exactly what I felt. And so this whole thing, I'll wrap this up, Quinn, unless you wanted to weigh in.
No, I'm good. I mean, I thought Milo did a really good job with that one.
Yeah, it's amazing. I love that piece. I'll watch it over and over and over. There's so many little things that are fun to just ride along on there. So yes, struggle is what, if I had to say one word, what he's talking about, what he's expressing, what he's sharing with us is universal, and it's this sense that we all struggle. We struggle with organization. We struggle with remembering groceries. We struggle with our identity. It's so poignant at your guys' age, as Mason says, it's uncertain. You guys don't know where life is taking you right now. You think you do, but you won't know what your career looks like fully for 30 years. So you're still in that. And that's, Milo captures that with this sense of, I'm going through life, but I really don't understand it yet. All I know is I can't sleep. I'm chronically disorganized. I know certain things about myself, but beyond that, it's all still, which is very much what, the age that you guys are So just really cool, you know, if we saw Milo right now, you'd feel connected a little bit when you kind of seen inside the psyche and the soul. And that's, you know, that's where we can go with this. Doesn't mean you have to do it right out of the gate, but I'm just trying to prep the table so as you start creating, you're kind of in this mindset as opposed to just, well, how do I put together a story?
I really liked the very end shot where where he crumples up the paper of all the things that he literally said throughout the entire video. Maybe not said, but it was in those little blurb things. And he takes them and he crumples them up, drops them, and then keeps walking. I don't know, it just showed that like sometimes you can move past it. At the very end, it was very, very cool.
It's kind of accepting of it, and yet, yeah, I mean, there's a lot, and I don't know how much of it is intentional and how much of it, like I said, just a natural creative flourish that just nailed it. But there's a lot to unpack there, you know, the bare feet, and you know, the worms, it's just, and the style, right? But anyway, I just want to show you, you know, this is student work. This is something you guys will be amazed at what you come up with in your final project. If we do this right, you know, if you will start creating productions that, you know, that are powerful. And I guess that's what I love about Blue is it's just, once you see it, you kind of never forget it. It's really unlike anything. And I'll break it down for you later technically, and we can steal some of the good ideas out of that. But the knack sound, the sound of the trains, the sound editing, the way it comes in and out.
The train is one point that I want to make. I don't know if it was just like, wouldn't reported just like ambient noise in the background, but I felt it went really well with the whole video because sometimes when stuff starts to pile up, I feel like, you know, you just want like time to stop so you can get a hold of things and figure things out. But just with like the birds and the train, it's like sort of a reminder that you know, time just flows, that everything just goes, whether you're kind of like moving with it or not.
Yeah, and you know, there's no word, right? Blue never says anything. And so yes, you get that, you know, sort of silence of our own mind. And then the fact that the outside world exists, you know, and the dichotomy of our, you know, we're in the big world with trains and birds and everything doing their own thing, but we're locked in our own little bubble too.
Also, with that digital clock, because we didn't know what was gonna happen next, I was expecting like it to go. But it was a digital clock.
The like the coffee maker clock that says she's late for class, he's late for class, or. You know, and there weren't a lot of jump scares, there weren't a lot of cliches, that was pretty kind of sophisticated.
I was expecting a jump scare.
You know, there, I don't know if you can see, there's like a ghost face floating in the closet, and that was sort of the.
It looks like the one they were drawing.
Yeah.
Creeped me out, and I was like, oh, I'm so
Man,
glad I
hadn't
don't
thought
live
about
in
that.
Cuba
Yeah, you're right, and, you know, I mean, this is how Milo's mind worked, where that's probably accurate, he probably did exactly that
And it
reason.
means like we're the creator of our own demons, like,
Yeah.
so much fun back there.
So I couldn't quite make out what you said.
Oh, the creator of like our own demons, like our problems are within ourselves, so I'm gonna make them worse.
I wonder how much of that just is, you know, just sort of intuitive to the writer, and how much of that was like intentional and thought out, right? If it was all intentional and thought out, somebody did a lot of deep thinking there about how to do this. Okay, so bottom line, in the end, what I'm asking you to do as a starting point, as a goal for your video creation and your concept creation is, you know, use the phrase, in the end, I want my audience to, okay, make sure you have an answer to that. I might even ask you to put it in treatment. And the words that I have associated with answering that, I want my audience to feel, to know, to think about, to understand, to sense, to take away. Any of those verbs, you know, are worthy. I want my audience to feel X. I want my audience to sense the uneasiness of my transition. Might be a big part of it. All that uncertainty and confusion that Blue feels, obviously, Milo has been going through, you know, with a transition of gender, I'm sure. Okay, so purpose. Purpose of video, let's make people feel something. Let's make something that, because you can't. It's really not that different than you're making a video either way. You're just thinking about it a little bit ahead of time, like, okay, what's the bottom line? What's the point? So then we look at some of the mechanics. So this will get into the structure of narrative, right? Narratives are stories. Stories are powerful. They're primal. They resonate with us. You can think of stories that move you, usually tragedies. We're kind of hardwired to think more about the things that have hurt us than the things that are great. So let's get into the article, narrative structure. And I put some things up here. Hopefully you guys read these. I misnumbered it. The one how to make a great video narrative is not as strong an article as this one. It was marked number 1. It should have been number 2. You know, and there's some points we can extract from that, but this article, Nailing the Craft of Narrative Writing Literacy Ideas, is excellent for understanding the structure. So we looked at the purpose of the story. Now we're going to look at how we build a story. Okay. So I'm just going to kind of run through what I thought were the best components here in this piece. Telling stories is as old as humanity. We see and hear them everywhere on a daily basis, from having a good gossip on the doorstep or at the dining hall with a neighbor, to advertisements that bombard us from billboards and whatnot, right? Radio, daily commute. Much is made of the art of storytelling, which Blue was an artistic story for sure. But weaving a good tale is a craft too, and crafts can be taught, practiced, and perfected over time. So we are now in the craft phase, right? We're looking at a formula you can use to create successful stories. So the main elements that comprise a good story or a narrative, they break it down for us. And we're going to actually, in our script, I want you to start identifying the transitions from one of these segments to the other as you create your stories. Setup, the setting, introducing characters, creating and introducing characters. And then this is the key to narrative, a problem. So you set the table, what they call equilibrium, and then you disrupt it. And that's where the tension starts to evolve, where your audience gets drawn in. Ooh, I didn't see that coming. How's this going to get solved? It's the classic way we're wired to respond. So the problem, right? So you create a setting and then you disrupt it, and then it builds to a climax that resolves the problem. One way or another, this thing gets answered. And then the last little coda is kind of the new normal. Okay? So we'll look at that in a couple different ways, but this idea of narrative is a section of different components makes it very easy for us to follow the same path here. So the purpose, they're into purpose 2, simple, tell the audience a story, motivate, educate, entertain. They can be fact, they can be fictional. Have you guys ever watched Dateline or any of the murder shows, reality shows?
Yeah.
They're nonfiction, but they're still very narrative driven. They set up and then they introduce the crime, and then the whole last hour of Dateline is how did they solve the crime? So they introduce the problem early, a murder, and then we spend 40 minutes figuring out the resolution component to the murder. So the challenge in writing is to captivate the audience and keep them engaged. So there's that whole other layer. Not only do we need to craft a narrative that follows a certain structure in order to satisfy our expectations, but you want to do it in a way that's human, that connects, that keeps people engaged. All kinds of genres. This is something as you guys brainstorm, and you could be thinking about not only your music video, which you'll probably pick a song that you like, which is fine. And just to elaborate on that, the music video, about 2 minutes, pick lyrics that tell a story and a story that you can visualize, that you can act out with people, right? That will allow us to do the other things that I want to get involved. But if it's a song that also has deep meaning for you, or you think makes a really powerful point, so much the better. But you can also be thinking about your final video, which is 3, 4, 5, 9 minutes, you know, where you really want to speak your mind like Blue does. You can be thinking about that now. And as you get to that point, here's some triggers. What genre might I work in? It could be an adventure. It could be a fairy tale, a myth, a love story, a drama, a fable, legend, science fiction, fantasy, mystery, comedy, tragedy, horror. A lot of students like to do horror stuff. So genres is a good starting point. If you're going from a personal value or a personal statement, you can also start over here and say, I want to do an adventure story. What do I want to say about adventure or about someone? So these genres, it can be a helpful launch pad to think about your pieces. This gets into structuring your writing time. This is more about teaching students to write short stories. We can skip that. But here we get into the heart of this article and what I thought was so helpful about it. So we really start to break down the components that make up a full narrative. Orientation, the beginning, the complication, the problem, the resolution, and then the extras, how do things wash out. So I'll just walk you through it just so you hear it verbalized, but again, read this as well, especially as you go back to when you're scripting. It might be good to pull this up and make sure you accomplish these goals. Orientation, we set the scene. We answer where and when is something happening. I think one of the other articles or later on it talks about it doing that. But you set the scene, you introduce your characters, and you just you create a vignette. It could be as simple as a guy eating lunch at the cafeteria. But it takes a few shots to show we're in a school cafeteria and we're focusing on this guy and he's eating his lunch. But now we've set the scene, right? And then, the light fixture could fall, and now we've introduced the problem. But you have to set the scene. So there's that beginning stage, and then it transitions into activities and events involving your main characters, and they're expanded upon, and then things get interesting, right? We start injecting unexpected or challenges for the heroes to overcome after we've established them. And then the complication gets resolved in this section. It doesn't have to be a happy outcome. Again, you can think about Dateline, the resolution. They introduced the problem early on that someone got killed, and then the resolution takes 45 minutes of the hour, and the climax is the guilty verdict or not guilty. That's always the climax point, and then they close out. And then you have to have a little end, right? You can't end at the climax. So fairy tales end with, and they lived happily ever after. You kind of show your audience the future. So not every narrative, follows this perfectly, but it's a great point for you guys to start with. And if you deviate a little bit here and there, just have a reason for it. But I'd encourage you to just follow these landmarks and see where it gets you, and then build from there. And then there's this wonderful graphic that shows, the setting of the scene. And, some movies take 20, 30 minutes to set the scene. They don't always introduce the conflict right away. The longer your setup, the more connected the audience is to that setup, and therefore the more upset they are, or the more engaged they are when something starts to challenge it. So if you watch The Shining, say, the first half hour of the movie is just about this guy going to get a job and his wife, and they introduce, and then the kid has a little special needs, but it doesn't turn into this epic supernatural battle till at least halfway through the movie. So they draw us in, they get us connected to these characters before they start messing with them, right? It's just kind of an emotional manipulation, if you will. So we set the scene, we introduce some tension, some problems, the rising action. These problems get worse, or there's multiple attempts to achieve, to resolve it, and then the climax is the answer. All along here, ever since the problem's introduced, the audience is, what's happening? What's going to happen? What's going to happen? What's going to happen? What's going to happen? The climax is, now you know. And then there's kind of a rapid fall off to the new normal. End of story. We will come, okay? So it's a mechanical process, really, that you can follow. We'll just go through. So they break down here a little more detail. In setting the scene, answers two of the central questions of the story, namely where and when. Where are we? What period of time? Are we in the future? Are we in the past? They might do that with costumes, right? If it's an 18th century piece, they might open in a grand ballroom and you can see everyone in the period costume, and right away they're telling us we're sort of, in Europe in the 1800s, where and when. So there's more detail there. And what we want to do, what I want you guys to think about here is these words. Choose an appropriate setting for your story and suitable characters to populate the world. The issue is we don't have access to a costume shop. You're not going to be able to do a period piece very easily. You guys probably, think about things that we can do here on campus, small casts, so an appropriate setting and suitable characters. It may be difficult for you to do something that involves an infant if none of your friends have a baby or want to allow them to be on camera, right? So you probably are going to think about doing stories in your contemporary world. We're here, we're college students or young people, in Pocatello or in the West, on a college campus maybe, and the issues that we face are appropriate and suitable just for logistical purposes. Your imagination is going to allow you to do much other things, but we have to think practically. So, the bargain at the center of the relationship between the reader and the writer, or the producer. It is a duo, right? We are the producers, but we are thinking about our audience the whole time, right? We talk about viewing experience, we talk about message. Keep that in mind as you go through the whole process. And here's what you're after. The bargain between the two is that the reader or the viewer will suspend their disbelief and buy into the world that's being created for them as long as it's interesting and engaging and consistent. So your job as the producer is to recognize, when am I going on too long? Or when am I trying to pack too much in, it's getting confusing. Keep it lean and mean and powerful, and your viewer will buy in the way we buy into Blue. We can feel the loneliness of the late night dorm room because we never break away from it in a way that distracts. So creating a believable world for characters to inhabit, how do you do that? Convincing details. Odd little details, the bare feet, maybe. Just little things that make it real, the Post-it notes. So believable world is a good goal. And think about a couple of small details that make it real for people. And then writing in a way that appeals to the senses. We talked about great storytelling, great visual storytelling. People feel it, they feel something. And so you can do that. In this case, they're talking about written copy, the smell of the smoke in the air. You guys can do it visually as well. Your character can be narrating his own story, in which case you could be talking about, I could smell the thick smoke in the air, or you could show, thick smoke in the air, or in video, a lot of it is those sound effects, right? The crunching of feet and leaves is a very sensual kind of thing, and we gather that. We can feel the crunchy leaves under our bare feet from the sound. You put it, so writing for the senses, okay? Thinking about producing for the senses. And that's often done through audio. Casting characters, so short stories usually only require one main character, a few secondary ones. Think of the short story more as a small scale production at an intimate theater than a Hollywood blockbuster. Just good advice, right? Let's keep these simple. You'll get plenty of practice without trying to make a grand show. So that's good advice. One main character, a few secondary ones. And then when you think about trying to create characters, one of the easiest things is to model characters on someone you know. So if your character is a big superhero, you might think about like the most powerful, impressive guy on the football team, or someone who sort of struck you as a superhero in real life. And that happens all the time. Almost all characters are biographical or autobiographical in one sense or another. So there's more detail in here. I really like this as I went through it. So we've got a world, we've got characters. Now we create the problem, right? If we don't have a problem, there is no story. The problem is the driving force of the action. This is really the definition of narrative. Usually in a short story, the problem will center around the primary character wants to happen or wants not to happen, a hurdle that must be overcome. It's in the struggle to overcome this hurdle that the bulk of the story happens. You know, he points out that a lot of times in conversation, we're discussing problems with friends that may never be satisfactorily resolved. I'm having this issue with my teacher. I don't know where it's going to go when I'm sharing you the story. In this context, you want to resolve it. You know, for a viewer, you know, isn't gonna catch up with you in a week and say, hey, how'd that thing turn out? So we want to give them a complete experience. We want to resolve the problem in our story. When a character successfully overcomes his or her problems or is decidedly crushed in the process of trying, the fact is, one way or another, it will finally be resolved. If you've ever watched a show or a movie or a book that ends kind of without much clarity, it's kind of dissatisfying, right? Sometimes creators do that to give you that, you know, to break out of the formula. But for the most part, we're happy when the story wraps up at the end and we go away from the theater or the viewing experience with a full understanding of what we just saw and how it ended. So it's a satisfaction for your viewer that you're creating there. And then it's true that stories often have more than one problem, or the hero or heroine is unsuccessful in multiple attempts. Movies are like that, right? The superhero has to fight like 10 battles before the big one that finally resolves things. So they have these hits and misses throughout, or multiple problems. But for beginning students, best to focus on a single problem. And I'd agree with that. I think there's some good advice there for you guys. Like I said, you'll have your hands full with everything else. The scripting, don't make the script too complicated. We get to the climax, the dramatic high point of the action. Also, when the struggles kicked off by the problem come to a head. So the climax will ultimately decide whether the story will have a happy or a tragic ending. And in the climax, two opposing forces duke things out until the bitter or sweet end, right? Either the good guy wins or the bad guy wins. The good force when, you know, the couple falls in love or she rejects him, right? You know, so that duality, you can think about that as you create. And as the action builds throughout the story, suspense increases. So your viewer, as the suspense increases, hopefully your viewer is getting more invested. You know, that's defined by your viewer's experience of suspense and increasing tension. And they wonder which force will win out, and climax is then the release, the final answer. So you want to put the screws to people and keep them guessing for a while before you resolve, right? And that's what makes great movies versus okay movies, is ones that just, you know, oh my God, I was on the edge of my seat until it ended. You know, it's because they're doing that on purpose. They know how to, you know, they're just so aware of how an audience is likely to respond to everything that they're doing, that they're creating the experience that they want you to have purposely. So the success of the climax then depends on how well the other elements of the story have been achieved. So if you have a great setup, you draw us in, you make us care about the characters. The problem is powerful and provocative, and I'm invested now, I'm all in it, and then, you know, that makes the climax that much sweeter. So you can think about that. And then this is good advice. The problem must matter dearly to the main character in order for the audience to feel it, right? We're going to identify with the main character. So the more intense the problem the main character faces, the more important it is, the more your audience is invested, right? So you can think about, you know, if you want your character to be running late for class, you want to think about your character maybe failing out of college, the first person ever to go, and if they don't pass this exam, they're going to be the first person in their family to go to college and not make it. It's a little heavier, right? So you can ramp up the intensity just by the problem you choose and the nature of the character you create facing that problem. And then resolution, right? We tie up the loose ends. It's often very short. It could be just one shot of, you know, people walking off into the sunset. But, you know, we see that they're both okay. and that they're moving on into their future, and that everything we just experienced is kind of ended and there's peace. So resolution is where lingering questions will be answered, in most cases be necessary to include as an ending immediately after the climax, otherwise it feels too abrupt. If it's just climax and end, it feels unfinished, people feel unsatisfied, reader feeling unfulfilled. The example of the fairy tales, they always wrap up with, and they live happily ever after. And we have kind of this nice, nice warm, fuzzy image. And then this is, very much what we've been talking about this first couple weeks is consider the emotions you want to leave your viewer feeling. And that's where, if you figured that out ahead of time, it will inform everything you do to actually create it. Your viewers will come away with a feeling by design, which is pretty cool when you think about it. And, beyond just the art of sharing ideas and emotions and experiences, person to person, you can take this power to create feelings by design and bring it into the influence world. You're marketing a truck, and I want my viewer to think that truck is so cool at the end. It can be a monetary goal. Same thing. I am able to craft an experience that makes somebody feel what I want them to feel. When you think about how powerful that can be. So the craft of storytelling, that's really what this discussion is about. He's got some tips, some practical tips. And so this will be, you'll start using this pretty soon. The first thing we're going to do after you pick your music video section or start thinking about your final narrative is write a treatment. And at the treatment, you will think about how does this open? What's the problem? You won't script it exactly, but you'll describe it in about 4 paragraphs, each of these sections. And then you turn the treatment into your script where you actually say, okay, this is what's going to be said at this time, or these are the first few shots. We'll get into sequencing, storyboarding, shot lists, things like that as we go. But this is a nice little tip. You need to think about setting your scene, introducing your problem, and entertain us. Narratives are the most popular of all styles. If you can't entertain and engage us, it's a little flat. Okay, so the rest of this is a longer article, but a lot of this is just PDF gibberish, right? You don't have to end. So those are the points. If it's helpful to you, I can leave that highlighted version up. I wanted you guys to read the whole thing, but I wanted to, as I read through it, I was like, oh, this is cool. This is great. So I just wanted to make sure we discuss that. So any questions, any thoughts? Is that all pretty clear? Guys online, you all good with that?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. So, like I said, the video article, there's probably some good ideas to tease out of that, but this is really the key thing that I want you to come away from today with and to come away from the class with in terms of how do I write a story, whether it's for video or anything else, this structure of the narrative. Okay. So, let's take a quick peek at what we got left. One story you guys might think about COVID. How did COVID affect campus or affect you or affect your friends or affect your family? It could be a very powerful story to tell. And you could dramatize it, you could take it and maybe someone in your circle dies of COVID, maybe you're a COVID denier, or someone in your family's a COVID denier, and then someone close to them. Powerful stuff, very timely, But we have the visual. It would be easy to get B-roll of everyone walking around with masks on. You could kind of show the dystopian feel of the world that we're in. So I got to figure out, and maybe you guys can help me. I'm assigning the reading. So in the last week, I assigned the reading for today, and I put the articles in that week, the week that they were assigned. Would it be easier if they're just in the week that we're actually reading? So I'm like bare bones, right? We're going to discuss these this week. I'm assigning them now. So anyway, I get a little confused like where I should put these. If you have any strong feelings one way or another, what makes more sense. But as we look for reading for Thursday, 8/27, I want you to read this bare bones chapter 1. We're going to go technical now. Okay, we're going to get the camera work out of the way. So I'll bring my camera in. So next Tuesday or Thursday, we will get our hands on the cameras and look at how they work. So read the bare bones. They're very simple, but kind of cool, in depth. He talks about light temperature and how the camera functions and stuff. It's just good background. May not make all the sense in the world, but it'll be a start for you. You'll absorb it over time as you stay with video. Let's see. Oh, the other article here is this Canon EOS announcement and spec sheet. And I want you to read this, even though it's going to be like, okay? It's, I don't know, 4 or 5 pages, but this is basically the latest professional gear from Canon. So it gives you a look at beyond the classroom, out in the big world. If you stay with this, this is the kind of gear that's being used. It's modular. You know, it's no longer just buy a camcorder. You buy the body, and then you can attach lenses and viewfinders. And so this is just a really cool spec. So, you know, read the features primarily. And it talks about the image sensor. That's a, you know, good thing to understand. And then go ahead and read all these drop downs, okay? For what it's worth, they're not real long. They're technical. But it's just going to give you some good, look at this camera system. And this is what's out there now. And this thing is $10,000 before you add all the bells and whistles to it. You know, it's 8K probably, right? It's the latest professional gear. But if you end up going out into production or thinking about buying higher end stuff, I just want you to have this look at where camera technology is out in the real world, because our gear is much simpler. And it's not gonna, okay? So then this will be a nice sort of practical look at all the things that the bare bones chapter talks about. And we'll get the cameras out and we'll go through that on Thursday. Appreciate your attention, guys. Hope that was helpful.
Next week is gonna be so hard for us. We're gonna look at this camera and we're like, what?
Guys, we're done online. We'll see you Thursday.
Thanks, Joe.
Yep, thank you.
I'll probably just,
Yeah, they appreciate it, especially if you haven't had a lot of experience already. It'll be helpful for us to give you some hands-on. Like I said, I'll help you catch up, you know.
all right.
Yeah. All right, yeah, if you can make it Thursday, that'd be great. Otherwise, we'll find a time.
I'm so glad I get to see you this semester.
I know. That was so fun to reconnect with you last semester and get you involved, you know, get you back on sports group.
I loved it. I loved every minute of it.
No, you did great too.
I miss it. Now that like this semester, I'm like, oh, I can football to get back in.
Right?
Basketball and oh my god.
First time in 6 years for me, we haven't had football and, you know, just like bury us right out of the gate, you know?
Are you like relaxed now at the beginning of the semester?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like a coast, you know, and Jim is just like, you know what, have an easy semester. I'm not gonna load you up because one, spring may be total chaos.
Oh, yeah, there's no way it's not gonna be chaos in spring.
Yeah, I mean, if they're able to do all the sports, yeah, we'll have the end of basketball, track and field, as well as all the fall sports.
And then soccer too, right? We're
Yeah,
doing
soccer,
so-
volleyball,
Yeah.
but, you know, I mean,
Well,
we,
I'm graduating, so. no.
what, in December?
Yeah,
Are you leaving town right away?
pretty much that's the plan, but.
Now I recognize, you guys are a pair.
Yes.
You're in here as a team. Nice. That would be awesome. I mean,
I'm
you
doing
guys,
a minor.
well, you can have a technical camera guy and, you know, a director, actress,
You're talking
writer.
about, I am the face.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, exactly. It's hell of a lot easier, you know, what Milo did with Blue, you know, self-shooting and acting was incredible. Isn't that amazing? Every time I watch it, I'm just like,
I'm watching like the worms and the ramen, then you're like, the only like nitpick I would do is, like, have you ever heard like water boil in a pot, like just that kind of bubbling cauldron sound? I would really have loved it if you could turn learned it just like when the worms happen, or like in the middle of the ramen sequence, have just a little bit of that boom, boom, and then to the ramen throwing. Because I think that would have been so
Boom, boom, like a boiling water sound.
like the boiling water, so
violently
they're
boiling.
thinking that like we was looking at the bowl, and you just hear like the water start to boil, and you hear it get a little louder, and then the loudest it gets is when the worms get dropped
Right,
into the
okay.
sink, and then it cuts to her or his face. I'm so sorry, pronouns suck for me. It cuts back to his face, and then the ramen bowl gets thrown. So it goes that water noise, the silence of the face, and then the crash of the water of the bowl. And I was sitting there, I was like, the sound design is so good. Oh, sorry, I love it. I love it.
It's amazing. We could really break that down too and learn a lot from it. We probably will revisit it because
Please, let's-
so much of the story is told so beautifully just through the sound
And it's,
editing.
I love the fact that you don't need words. It doesn't need story, or doesn't need a narrator, so to speak. Well, thanks, Rob. It's
Yeah.
so good to see
Other,
you.
I know, but the awareness to put those little blurbs on
And
really
they were in the
helps.
same spot. They were like perfectly picked so that they were like enhancing when when he was walking, he put it right next to his feet. Or when he was doing like the letters. I can probably talk about this all day.
I know, and that's on there. I mean, you'll want to watch it more than once. I just, like I said, that's the fourth or fifth time I've watched it all the way through, and it just blew me away again. I probably haven't done it since last year, and it's just like, wow, this piece is.
Like it still has the taste of like somebody who doesn't have access to the high, like it's still definitely rough around the edges, but it's beautifully rough around the edges. It still shows and tells a story in such a powerful way. If I ever see mine long, I'm like, dude, I watched your blue and it's great.
I know.
Masterpiece.
I had a just quick question to making sure,